Hey, welcome to Snippet number 16. We have talked extensively about the dream that God has for us, a dream to experience oneness. The question then becomes, how does this dream come crashing down? Because when you look objectively at the institution of marriage, it seems as though more marriages are failing than succeeding.
Yeah,
What makes marriage so difficult?
right. Well, we all know there is an enemy that we battle against, and that is the invisible threat that we face, named Satan, on a regular basis in our marriage. His sole intent is to destroy what God has held up, and we've been discussing as this sacred institution called marriage. So I want to read Genesis 3, 1 through 6 in the Message, because it's just a modern day way of looking at a very familiar passage. But I want you to look at it and really think about the context of what's going on and how uniquely Satan deceives Eve into thinking wrongly about God and about her current situation. The serpent was clever, more clever than any wild animal God had made. He spoke to the woman, "Do I understand that God told you not to eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "Oh, not at all. We can eat from the trees in the garden. It's only about the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, 'Don't eat from it. Don't even touch it, or you'll die.'" The serpent told the woman, "You won't die. God knows at the moment you eat from that tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil." When the woman saw that the tree looked like good eating and realized what she would get out of it, she'd know everything, she took and ate the fruit and then gave some to her husband, and he ate. And everything comes crashing down.
Don't you wish you could go back in history and go, stop? When you look at Satan's strategy, his first and primary strategy is to destroy the institution of marriage. Why? Because it was the first institution that God created. Before school, before government, before anything else, it was the institution of marriage to show off what God was like. So that we're image bearers of God. I'm a male image bearer of God. You're a female image bearer of God. Together, we're supposed to reflect what God is like. And so it makes sense that Satan would target the marriage over anything else to destroy. And that's what I think we're not aware of many times.
Yeah. And God can't be destroyed by Satan, but he can attack the things that are sacred to him, that he's held up. So remember, God's first purpose was for us to reflect the unity of God in our marriage. That was his first intent for us. So Satan's first objective is to do anything he can to distort God's unity in us, so that everything about our marriage feels fractured and disunified.
Right.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
We've struggled with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anybody does.
Right.
If they live and eat and breathe and sleep.
Because we have an enemy.
Yeah. The second purpose that we had talked about as we taught these principles earlier, the second purpose was to make an impact on the next generation.
Right.
Well, what we argued for is we can do that better together than we can individually. Well, it makes sense that Satan's second strategy that he uses is he tries to destroy the impact that we can make on future generations.
Right.
That whole idea that, well, you know what, you and I together are making an impact on the next generation. Well, if you dissolve this, well, then the impact then that we can make on the next generation is cut off.
At least it's very fractured.
Right.
If there's already existing
That's
children.
the lie that I think couples buy into,
Right.
that divorce is an okay thing.
Right.
Well, then divorce cuts off the influence you can have on your children.
Right. Yeah.
And then on your children's children.
And then think about the third purpose was for us to move forward with a lifetime companion. And Satan's another goal of his is to seek to destroy that companionship between God and his people. We feel that through shame, through the breakdown of the family that Dan was just describing. He is disrupting that companionship that God intended for us to experience together.
As we begin to try and apply this, we've talked about not just standing together, but standing shoulder to shoulder, because we face a common enemy.
Yeah,
we face a common foe.
Right.
And I think we fail to realize that. Listen to the words in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. He says, for our struggle, he's talking to believers, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. My struggle is not against you, but my struggle is against world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. What this is drawing out, it's picturing that Satan has a spiritual mafia. Literally, this angelic forces of darkness that he's orchestrating to try and destroy marriage.
Yeah.
Your marriage is a target of Satan. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy your marriage.
Right.
Your battle is not against one another.
Right.
Your battle is against this evil forces that are trying to get you to think that
Right.
each other are your enemy.
I want you to think about all of us to really think if we could actually really believe and understand that on a practical, fleshed out basis. Because they say there's just as many Christian marriages that are dissolving as non-Christian marriages. I'm not surprised that non-believers in a marriage relationship are not making it, but I'm very surprised, and I think it's directly connected to this fact that we have forgotten that we have an enemy that is working to demolish us. When we forget that, then we're not working together, we're working against each other. Tony Evans, teacher and pastor, says, the tragedy today is that many Christians think they are fighting flesh and blood in their marital and parenting issues, rather than realizing that Satan has an agenda to destroy their home. Whoever controls the family controls the future.
That's a great quote. So then, application.
Yeah.
How do we live out this thing that if you're not my enemy, how do I live that out?
Right. Well, that phrase, I think, is critical to actually, I think of different times, and it's very hard to do because in the heat of an argument, you don't care about some of these truths sometimes. But to ask God, when you're not struggling, to give you strength to look clearly at the battle that's going on. It doesn't mean that takes away the discord or the issues of finances or whatever it is that needs to be addressed. But we need to step back away from it and fight it common together as opposed in opposition to one another. And so that would be our application for this week. Take a minute and to actually acknowledge that that is hard to do and that make an attempt to stop in the middle of conflict, and even if it means separating and just cooling off for a little bit and saying, let's come back together when we can look at this without attacking one another, because you are not my enemy. I have an enemy right now that is making me despise you because that is his agenda. And we have to remember that as believers all the way to the end, or we will never make it.
Okay.
Or we'll live a dead marriage.
So keep reminding yourself, once you get in the context of a struggle, you are not my enemy.
Right.
It ought to be just a reflexive response.
Yeah.
You are not my enemy.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us today. We will see you next week.